Hello Raiders, I am Hal and I would like to welcome you back to Bandit's Ballads. In the first episode you had the distinct displeasure of meeting Balon Blacktide, a man who grew up in a warrior culture whose people value strength above all else, and absolutely abhor the idea of being productive members of society. I mean, why work hard for your bread when you can just kill the baker and take it from him? A reasonable person would probably think, but if I kill the baker, who's going to keep making bread? But for an Ironborn, reason is a foreign concept, so that's a problem for another time. One that can be solved by finding another baker and killing him. Or making him a thrall to ensure a long-term solution to the issue of bread deficiency. But I'm not here to talk about the old way of life of the people of the Iron Islands. I'm here to talk about just one of them, Balon Blacktide. When his homeland had a change in management, crime was made illegal and he, along with many of his buddies, could no longer advance their raiding careers and instead were forced into other professions, unworthy of an Iron Man. So in a stroke of entrepreneurial genius, these Ironborn reavers built themselves a boat and sailed west towards well, they didn't know exactly what they were sailing towards, they've only heard rumors, but after their ship got wrecked in a violent storm, a few of them washed up on the shores of Calradia, where they quickly got to work, stealing, killing and pillaging everything in their path, until an Imperial Lord intercepted them, decimated their piss patrol, and took Balon captive in order to interrogate him. Eventually our hero ex-machina'd his way out of jail and spent the following 3 months being captured by everyone, and getting passed around like a blunt between various factions. Bandits, Imperials, Sturgeons. But from the dark pits of imprisonment, he drew his strength, because unlike the savages of his homeland, everyone here is honor-bound by the Lagetta Convention to treat prisoners of war with dignity and keep them fed, which is what allowed our anti-protagonist to regenerate his health, get back in fighting condition and murder his opponents with their own weapons. Once he broke the curse of captivity, he stole enough money to purchase a horse which allowed him to travel the world with greater speed and outrun those who would seek to deprive him of his freedom. After that, he spent the next few weeks fighting a few other assholes, befriended one of them, and eventually obtained his first weapon, a bag of fishing harpoons. And that is where today's chapter begins, now that the recap is out of the way. Before we dive into the action, however, and I allow the Balon personality to take over, let us take inventory of what we've earned by paying the iron price. A bunch of shitty javelins, which were already mentioned, an old workhorse, which was already mentioned, 245 gold coins, which according to my looter companion are called dinars, a hit point percentage of 32, which is going to keep rising for as long as I have food, which I do, for 11 days, which also happens to be the date in which we find ourselves to be, and with that many witches around I might have attracted the attention of the Spanish Inquisition, which nobody expects. As they were being burnt at the stake, the witches turned their heads towards that magical number and shouted in unison, "Foreshadowing!" before their vocal cords melted away, unlike beams made of steel. Anyway, enough talking. It's time for raiding. But where would we go from here? I asked my looter buddy, and he said he knew a spot, somewhere north of Battania, like I knew what the fuck that meant. To which I replied that I'm not from around these parts and that I come from a land far, far away. He agreed to lead me there, and while we were traveling, he kept teaching me about the continent of Calradia, the 8 warring kingdoms that are locked in endless conflict, and a litany of other things such as important settlements or notable people. It took us 4 days to get to our destination, but before we arrived, we had a couple of peculiar encounters. The first among these was with a group of 6 sea raiders, which I briefly considered attacking. After running some risk analysis and remembering how deadly their javelins were, I decided to stay the fuck out of their way, if not for me, then for the sake of my looter. Don't get me wrong, I don't give 2 shits about him, but his knowledge of this land is an asset. And before he inevitably bites the dust, I'd like to learn as much as I can. Afterwards, I passed by another group of only 3 raiders and I was even more tempted to attack them. If I could kill 3 of them with no weapon, shield or horse, then I could easily handle these guys now that I have those 3 things, right? My looter fellow didn't think so and told me to just stick to the plan and head over to Battania. His advice triggered flashbacks of how I got dominated by those I eventually killed. So I agreed with the looter, whom I will now refer to as Luther, to set him apart from all the other looters we're about to kill in the following weeks. When I noticed a pair of forest bandits, however, the urge to shed their blood was too strong to resist, especially when I saw them running away from me. The adrenaline made my heart pump so loudly that I could barely hear my companion telling me not to attack them because I could get shot. But I didn't listen. When we caught up, I told him to stay away and only intervene if it's absolutely needed, which I was certain it wasn't. I mean, how could they do anything to me? I ride fast and I have a shield to protect me from their arrows, as well as javelins that can instantly kill them. The potential reward was worth the risk. So I charged at them, but it wasn't a full frontal charge because if I ride straight towards my targets, I make myself easy to shoot, so I rode somewhat diagonally to make it more difficult for them to take aim. When I got close enough, I threw a javelin at one of these guys and he didn't even have the goddamn common courtesy to fucking die because it only hit his arm. That's okay, I'll circle back and the second throw will end his miserable life, I thought to myself, before I took an arrow to the knee and fell unconscious. Last thing I vaguely remember was Luther shouting at them and then running away. I don't know for how long I was out, but when I awoke, I was back on my horse with Luther leading it towards Battania. I asked how'd he manage to get us out of there and he said that he hurled some insults at those bandits to get their attention, and while they chased him, he ran away. After a few minutes of running, he slipped away in a bush, allowed the bandits to pass, and then came back for me. Said this makes us even for that time I rescued him from sea raiders. Luther also offered me a piece of advice, said that with our current gear, we can't hope to contend with anything other than small looter gangs. So that was my plan for the following weeks. For now, we'd march to our destination without any more sideshows. When we arrived in the village of Svenrin, I asked, "Why are we here?" To which Luther responded, "You see, boss, when I was traveling all alone, why were you able to catch me?" "Because I had a mount, and you didn't." "Exactly, but horses don't come cheap unless you're in Battania. That's why we're here. And if you're looking to scale our little operation, each new fighter you hire is gonna need a mount, otherwise we'll be sitting ducks." Makes sense. We need to purchase mounts and we can't stray too far away from this area. As such, we'll need to look around here for some opportunities to make money. I spotted quite a few of these opportunities. 5 raiders, 8 looters, 12 looters, 13 peasants, and another warband of 36 looters. 2 gangers with rusty weapons weren't enough to deal with any of these warbands, so we had to keep looking and eventually we worked our way south, through the narrow pass of Druimore where we spotted 6 thieves. I would have immediately attacked them if I weren't smack dab in the middle of a war zone between the Battanians and the Vlandians, in an area that's chock full with choke points. Before engaging in a fight, I needed to make sure the nobility won't ambush me while I'm disorganized. And yeah, after each battle, your speed will significantly decrease for a while, and if any enemies notice your party during this moment of temporary weakness, they'll easily catch up. You gotta take that into account each time you plan to fight. Once I made sure the area was clear, I went towards the last known location of the 6 looters, but in their stead, I ran into another group of 5. Even better. So I made myself look like an easy target and allowed these fellers to come to me to ask for alms, but something was wrong. One of these guys clearly wasn't a looter. He was a forest bandit, and if you remember, forest bandits are equipped with ranged weapons. I was in a bit of a pickle here and I couldn't just escape. Worst case scenario, I'd get knocked out, Luther would get killed, I'd lose all my loot and probably get sent back to chapter 1. Nothing I can do except fight, so I told my guy to stay well away from the action and just let me handle this. He did not object. It's clear this guy isn't a total coward. He outsmarted those bandits and saved my life. But he seems to have a bit of an aversion to combat. Works fine for me, anyway. Unlike other looters, this gang had an advantage. They're a ranger. Unfortunately for them, a ranger is also a disadvantage because while the bulk of the enemy force chases me with sticks and stones, they slowly but surely get farther away from the archer, and when he's isolated, I can ride forth and show him my javelin. Up close. That didn't work as well as I had hoped because while taking aim, the rock thrower threw a rock at me. It's all he knows to do, and that messed with my aiming process. And I had to scramble to readjust. I could barely turn around and actually land a hit, but I only struck my target in the shoulder as his bodies rapidly closed in. With a bit of luck, I managed to sprint out of there and prepare another throw, but as I rode away, an arrow somehow circumvented my shield and dealt a lot of damage. That fucking hurt. In my anger, I turned around and stampeded straight towards my target as my mount was struck by his next arrow. When I got close enough, I showed him that mine is bigger than his. With the biggest threat out of the picture, it was time to deal with the rabble. My plan was to lead them far away from the carcass of their fallen comrade, to buy myself enough time to dismount and pick up his bow and arrows. But as I attempted to do so, the rock thrower hit me with another stone, even though I was blocking. I'm starting to believe that this round shield is garbage, but at least it's better than nothing. After a few seconds of running, I managed to create a large gap in between the bow and the looters. But just as I turned around, the stone tosser had a change of heart and started going towards Luther. In other words, he went back to where the bow was. And if I wanted to pick it up, this guy needed to be removed. I was hoping one javelin would get the job done, but I was wrong, and when I returned to throw the last one, the other boyos were getting real close. But I killed my target just in time to get away, and then I could move on to the next step of my master plan.
Crashing this plane with no survivors.
When the looters were far enough from the fallen bandit, I rode back to his location, dismounted, picked up the bow and a lot of arrows, and then mounted up just as the enemy was breathing down my neck. Screaming, rather. Once I escaped from their grasp, all I had to do was shoot them from horseback. But when I tried equipping the bow, I couldn't grab it. It's as if some eldritch force prevented me from using it from the saddle because it wasn't a regular bow. It was a longbow, and longbows can only be wielded on foot. That's barely an inconvenience. All I gotta do is ride away, put some dirt in between me and the looters, dismount, shoot, mount back up, and then ride away. Rinse, repeat, win. At first, I kind of miscalculated the amount of distance I needed in order to accurately land an arrow, and because my enemies were getting close, the stress made me miss my shot. Not only that, but the bow was surprisingly difficult to draw, probably because of my lack of skill with ranged weapon. That or muscular atrophy. But if the bow takes longer to draw, that's only a minor inconvenience which can be solved by simply taking a bit more distance from the looters before dismounting and taking aim. And so my next arrow went into a looter's neck, the one after that landed right between the eyes, and the final one hit the looter in the chest, but I was only hoping it was the final shot because the enemy somehow survived. Good thing my mount was positioned to get me out of there pronto, just in case this were to happen. Having contingency plans is based. Rushing recklessly into battle is cringe. Anyway, I rode away, dismounted, took aim, and when I fired my actual final arrow, the looter received it in his chest and somehow survived, so I captured him. If he can take 2 arrows through the heart and shrug it off as if it's a mosquito bite, this guy is clearly Ironborn material, so I was planning to recruit him whenever he was ready to make the Pledge of Allegiance to me. When the battle was over, I noticed that these looters were carrying some prisoners. couple of boys from Sturgia who left their village trying to join up with the Lord's army, but on their way, they got ambushed by the bandits and captured. Because I rescued them, they offered to join me instead, as long as I'd be willing to pay their wages. We shook on it, and now our party grew to 4 people, plus 1 extra prisoner who'd soon enlist with us. But because our gang got bigger, our movement speed got slower, so we needed to head back to one of those Battanian villages and buy a few horses as soon as I'm done telling you what I got from the battlefield. The ranger's rusty sword, which will be my main melee weapon until something better shows up, a lot of armor that can be sold for a decent chunk of money, a hog, and a bunch of food. Because I couldn't carry all of it, I had to leave a sack of grain behind. Not a huge loss. Getting to the village of Glintor wasn't a walk in the park because the area was crawling with large packs of outlaws, but we evaded them, and by the time we finally arrived, I earned enough money to purchase 2 horses, and I'd still have enough currency left to pay the wages of my warriors for 9 days. I hesitated purchasing these horses for a little while, but then I realized that money is worthless unless you spend it. So I made the investment and then endeavored to find more people to fight in order to steal their gold and pay my crew. We then spent the next couple of days scouring the land for gangs that we can fight. And when I noticed a couple of raiders, I smelled a payday. Not a big one, but a payday nonetheless. When I approached them, they knew my intent and tried talking their way out of the situation. "We're just harmless traders," they said, hoping that maybe I'm a law-abiding mercenary who will leave them alone. They were wrong. I knew they were lying, but I played along with them, so I said, "Oh, you're traders? Even better. Now hand over your valuables or taste my blade." Even though we're 5 versus 2, our morale is low, and if even one of their javelins lethally hits one of us, it could be enough to instill fear in my troops and make them abandon me. One of us did die, but the rest of my men finished the job while I did nothing but watch and miss a few of my shots. Rest in peace, Sturgian recruit, and long may you live, my new Sturgian recruit. Enjoy your inheritance. Now, because most of my guys use hammers, both raiders got knocked out, which means that I won't get a lot of loot out of them. But I can potentially induct them into my gang in the future. As for the loot, it wasn't as worthless as I was expecting. I did get a spear, which is an excellent tool for someone in my position. It's possibly one of the best weapons to use from horseback, especially when the horse is as slow as mine. But that fight barely earned me any gold, so I needed to find more people to rob. A lot more. What about these 7 mountain bandits? Definitely not them. They have 4 javelin eaters and I got 4 peasants that die in 1 hit. Next, 13 villagers. I'd love to play with them, but I have neither the manpower nor the impressive weaponry I need to defeat them. Next, 5 looters who are chasing a bunch of peasants along with another gang of 8. I cannot engage them in a fight just yet, but I shall follow them around, and if the 2 gangs split up, I can fight these 5. It took a bit of stalking, but eventually, those poor schmucks wandered too far away from their friends and ended up in the lion's jaws. Before the battle began though, I borrowed one of the Battanian ponies from my soldiers to ride it into battle. It's faster than my workhorse, but outside of battles, it's better for our travel speed if I leave this one for my men and mount the Sumpter horse instead. This would involve a bit of micromanagement, but it is the best way to maximize not only my effectiveness in battle, but also the mobility of my party. Anyway, the fight itself was nothing special. I rode 4th, killed a guy with a couple of javelins to the chest, heavily injured another, dealt some heavy damage and let my guys handle the cleanup. The only thing worth mentioning is nearly killing a looter and expecting him to be finished off by my men in the next second, but that guy did not go down easily. He managed to take 2 stabs at my boys before getting knocked out. He nearly killed one of us. What an absolute lad. When the last survivor realized he's in deep shit, he tried to run away, but I ran him down and he was no longer a survivor, to put it bluntly. My only regret was not capturing the stabby boy to eventually add him to my ranks. But that choice was made for a reason. I had way more people than horses and I didn't want to be slowed down. The loot sucked though. 47 gold and a bunch of peasant gear. Still, that was better than nothing. Bit by bit we build our wealth and we can use it to slowly grow our party as well as the number of horses we own. Things are going well so far. Or are they? After all, there's 2 other gangs nearby, 29 bandits in total, and my party is disorganized after the fight, which severely impairs our traveling speed. Could we get away before these outlaws take notice? Of course we can. Crisis averted. That was just an attempt at subverting your expectations and making you fear for my safety. I'm fine. Uh-oh, you weren't supposed to see that. But now that the cat's out of the bag, that doesn't happen until later, so let us enjoy these small victories before our inevitable end. Could be a happy ending though, you never know. Anyway, after that fight, I wanted to wander around Glentor, but something prevented me. Call it a gut feeling. I just felt uneasy hanging out there, so I traveled west into Vlandian territory, where I ran into a group of 4 stealers. Before I declared my hostile intent, I wanted to make sure that no lords are in or around the nearest city, and when I was certain I wouldn't get interrupted, these poor sods became even poorer as I liberated them from their earthly belongings, as well as their lives. Well, one of them survived and promptly got captured, but let's be honest, that's probably an improvement. After I sold their loot in a nearby village, I had enough money to afford another Battanian horse, but when I tried going in that direction, I just couldn't. A spiritual blockage of some kind, I can't quite tell. It's similar to the gut feeling that drove me here in the first place. So I went in the opposite direction, where my path was blocked by 9 sea raiders, which I managed to avoid, only for my path to be blocked by 9 sea raiders. A déjà vu. A glitch in the matrix. Second time around they were really close to catching me, but I wiggled my way out of there and went to look for more victims. It didn't take long to find them. Another 4 looters, one of whom I sent onto the next realm. But out of the 3 who got injured, I only captured 1 because I didn't want to cripple my traveling speed. After this battle, my Sturgan recruit tapped me on the shoulder and informed me that on our last visit to a village, he sold his share of the spoils and used the money to purchase a bag of fishing spears, so he asked for a promotion. I could use another javelin thrower, so I gave him 15 gold as a small token of appreciation for his initiative, and he became a woodsman. He told me that once he feels skilled enough with ranged weapons, and when he gains enough loot, he plans on becoming an archer if I was willing to fund his education. Sounds good to me. Even 1 archer can make a big difference, especially against unarmored and unshielded targets, such as looters or peasants. As for the loot we obtained this time, I found a spiked mace, which would be an excellent tool of recruitment in the future. For now, I'll stick to using the sword, because I'd much rather kill my enemies and take their stuff, instead of knocking them out, capturing them, and adding them to my gang. From here, I needed to find more contributors that would selflessly donate all of their gold and gear to me and my group of traveling pilgrims. But that didn't go as smoothly as I expected. At first we saw a group of 6 luthieres, but just as I started chasing them, a larger group of raiders showed up, and if I kept up the pursuit, both parties would have ganged up on me, so I abandoned the chase and looked for another target. It didn't take long to spot another 7 luthieres, but they too had guardian angels looking over them. Then I spotted a group of 10, but as I chased them, I ended up in the same situation. So I ran around aimlessly looking for a fight, but every time I saw an opportunity, my attempt to garner donations was swiftly interrupted by the appearance of another group. Every single time. It took us 3 days of aimless wandering to find our next group of sponsors. 10 luthieres who didn't want to fight me. And in case you're wondering why I'm calling them that, that's what they call themselves because they're Vlandian. They speak with a strange accent. When the skirmish began, the two sides were pretty evenly matched. My soldiers were stronger, but the looters have the numbers, so if I wanted an easy victory, I had to ride to them and grab their attention to get them to split up. Half of them would chase me, while the other half would end up in my soldier's meat grinder. That worked pretty well, but because most of these guys were human trebuchets, I got heavily injured. When most of their fighting force was defeated, the remaining thieves got routed and tried to escape the battlefield, but I couldn't have that, so I ran them down and killed most of them. Killed. Why do I use such crude language when I have an even better expression at hand? I paid the iron price. Much better. Fewer morbid connotations to an uninformed listener. As a reward for turning these looters into dead looters, I got almost 200 dinars and a modest amount of loot. Two of my guys were also ready for their promotions. One of my raiders became a warrior, and my Sturgian woodsman got himself a bow and turned himself into an archer. Funniest shit I've ever seen. Then I tried going after some other bandit parties, but just like it was prior to our last fight, I got cocked by bigger gangs and had to abandon my chase. So I resigned to returning to Battania to purchase a few more ponies. In my path, I ran into another group of 6 ruffians and, I split them up, ordered my men to charge, and they were defeated. Only one of them perished. 5 just got their lights knocked out, and if I were feeling particularly expansionistic, is that even a word? I would have offered them a place in my crew, but as you're well aware of, I cannot afford to sacrifice my party's mobility, so most of them were left behind. The loot was pretty decent, considering that we're basically feeding off of bottom feeders. 126 gold and a bit of trash that can probably fetch another 100. Before we arrived at our destination, we also spotted another group of 7 lowlives, and using my simple yet effective Divide et Impera strategy, we wiped them out, and as recompense for lowering the amount of criminals in the world, I received a gambeson that was not only tattered but also quite ragged. At least it wasn't worn, torn, frayed, or ripped, and it still provided a bit of protection, despite its unsightly design. Seriously, this has got to be the ugliest armor I've ever seen, but it's better than anything else I have, so I'll keep wearing it, at least until I find something that can match or preferably exceed its performance. But because I also tried training my athletics at the end of this fight, 3 of these looters made their escape, so it was time for round 2. But before I caught up, some help arrived, so I had to wait for them to sod off before finishing the remaining 3 losers. 8 of us versus 3 of them. What could go wrong? Turns out everything can go wrong if you're overconfident, cause I thought I can handle the situation all by myself, without any help from my soldiers, and that was true for a while. I did take one of these guys down. But when I tried eliminating the second one, he pulled out his hammer and smacked my leg so hard I fainted. I underestimated him and paid dearly for it. But my soldiers calmly went forth to kill the enemy, and as soon as that was done, they picked me up and dressed my wound. But when I arrived at the village, the people of Glintor were temporarily indisposed and their horse shop closed down, due in no small part to Caladog throwing an autistic temper tantrum. Frustrated because the Sturgians took this village from him, he decided to burn it to the ground, so if I wanted horses, I needed to travel to Svenrin. I had to be careful though, because the only way to get to my new destination was through a couple of choke points that were being patrolled by huge enemy armies, so, I didn't want to get imprisoned again. Upon my arrival, I sold all the loot hoarded from recent fights, which amounted to a total value of 385 gold. If money was all I wanted, I would have amassed 841 dinars in my bank account, but I was going to spend mostly everything on horses. Another 3 would suffice for now. I would have liked to buy 4, but if I were to do so, I would only have had 85 dinars left, and seeing how the daily wage of my crew is 20 gold, that wasn't enough. But yeah, I only purchased 3 mounts and I still had 270 coins left, which was enough to pay the wages of my men for almost a fortnight. In other words, I had 13 days to find some people to plunder before my gang went bankrupt. So I just kept going south, narrowly avoiding anyone I wasn't sure I could fight, and eventually stumbling into a group of 5 looters. You already know the drill. Divide and conquer and then claim the spoils, which amounted to a grand total of 145 dinars, 50 of which were spent on my ranger's promotion to the next tier. He was no longer a hunter boy. Now he was an archer man. Shortly after liquidating the loot in the nearest village, I ran into another group of 6. Because I was getting bored of watching my warriors do everything, I decided that this time I'll lead the charge. So I rode forth and launched a javelin at one of my enemies and instantly killed him. But I got a dose of instant karma and got hit in the leg by the one who was standing behind my target. I was out cold, so it was up to my soldiers to shoulder the burden. Unfortunately, because I didn't spend time to split the looters up, they managed to fight in unison and were slightly luckier than my frontline warriors. When 3 of mine have fallen, the remaining 3 made a poo-poo in their pantaloons and started running the hell out of there, even though they could easily have won the battle. But the fight wasn't yet lost, because while my cowards ran from their responsibilities, the enemy chose to pursue them instead of turning back on the only one of us left fighting. According to the art of war, turning your back on an enemy combatant is a big no-no, especially when that enemy has a bow and can shoot you in the back. 2 of my enemies died this way, and by this point, the fight went back to being evenly matched, as it was reduced to an honest and fair 1v1 between the guy who ran after the cowards and my newly appointed Sturgian archer. Who is going to win? Place your bets, everyone, because this is intense! If my ranger fails, my entire gang dissolves and my assets, including 5 Battanian horses, get seized by the enemy. With these stakes at the forefront of his mind, my archer went after the remaining looter, who eventually abandoned his chase for chicken shits and turned back to fight the last one of us that was still standing. The 2 sworn enemies were running at each other, and when the distance closed, my archer took aim and changed his mind. As the looter closed in, my ranger took aim again and missed. Not once, but twice. If the enemy gets close, there's a small yet real possibility that Arrow Boy won't be able to draw his sword in time to defend himself and end up getting sliced, losing us the fight and dooming our gang. But the fault wouldn't be his, no. The blame belongs entirely to the gang's incompetent leader, whoever he may be. Luckily for us, the archer's arrow struck true, piercing the looter's vocal cords and rendering him speechless forever. Because he fucking died. Victorious once more. Turns out the Sturgian peasant I rescued from bandits precisely a month ago is one of the best investments I ever made, and when he asked for another raise, I did not hesitate granting it to him. Now he's achieved his final form as a Super Sturgian veteran ranger, and because of his accomplishments, he also deserves a proper name, just like Luther. For now, we'll call him Vet. Anyway, only one of us died in this attack. One of my arrow sponge looters. The drowned god needed a strong oarsman, and so, this warrior now feasts in his watery holes, even though, he died on land. But we're close to a river, so that has to count, right? I don't know enough about the intricate mechanics of the afterlife to weigh in on the issue. It just works, alright? Moving on. The loot we took from this battle absolutely sucked, so we needed to commit more larceny. With a bit more money in my pockets, I marched my wolf pack back towards Glentor, narrowly avoided some Battanian patrols, and eventually noticed a gang of 9 thieves. We were also 9 thieves, so the fight would be evenly matched. In order to avoid the pain and suffering I experienced in my last fight, I would play it safe. The main plan was still to divide and conquer, but I decided to also inflict as much damage as possible, and managed to score a couple of awesome javelin kills. When the enemy's morale broke, I gave chase and killed each and every one of them. For the last one, I actually dismounted because I wanted to train my athletics a little, and with a single slice of my sword, I cut my enemy down and also gained 2 levels in my running skill. When counting the casualties, we suffered none, which is equal to the number of enemies that survived this battle. As for the spoils, they were pretty good. 145 dinars, some fruits that reminded me of the first Calradian village I've ever raided, and a keg of beer, which is a guaranteed morale booster for the crew. I also got a decent amount of trash tier gear, whose total value is almost 130. I mean, these are mere scraps, but considering my current situation, it's the best I can hope for. I'm not yet the deadly predator I would like to be. It might take me a while to get there. But until I reach that point, I should strive to be an efficient scavenger that can survive for a long time and slowly build his strength. When I reached my destination, the village of Glintor was still burnt to a crisp, so I needed to go to the other one in order to source a few more horses. I could only afford to purchase a couple of them, and after I did, I only had 167 coins left in my pockets. With a daily wage of 29 dinars, I only had 5 days to find the next batch of victims. This time, I would go east, to scour the Sturgian territories for an easy fight. When I first passed through here a month ago, I spotted a lot of small raiding parties and I was hoping they'd still be around, so I can lay claim to their gear and gold. But as I was leaving Battania, I had to be careful. This narrow mountain trail is a prime spot for an ambush, so I needed to keep my eyes peeled for enemy armies, such as Caladogs. An unimportant detail in the grand scheme of things, but one I couldn't just ignore in that moment, so it was worth mentioning. As soon as I was out of Battania, I saw a party of 8 looters, but instead of describing how the fight went, I'll just let my epic display of combat skill entertain you while I'll be talking about my current financial struggles, so you may understand why I'm taking things slowly. You see, the stage I'm in right now is a delicate balancing act between recruiting people, making money, and purchasing horses. And if things fall out of balance, I'll lose everything I've built thus far, because here's how it goes. On my own, I can only fight tiny groups of looters, so if I want to attack larger targets, I need warriors. The more, the merrier. But the more fighters I recruit, the more our traveling speed decreases, and to offset the speed penalty that comes with an enlarged party size, we need to purchase mounts. If we don't, we slow to a crawl and will get caught by any gang of bandits that's even slightly bigger than ours. Or worse, by the local authorities. But if I spend too much money on horses, I'll probably not have enough to pay the wages of my soldiers, which may lead to desertion. If that were to happen, and I'm suddenly left with more horses than people, well, that would be even worse for my travel speed, and the only way to recover my mobility is to either sell my horses for 1/10 of their market price, or just release them into the wild and consider all the money I spent on them wasted. That would be quite terrible, wouldn't it? That's why I gotta take things slowly and avoid biting more than I can chew. As a bonus, if we don't have a healthy horse-to-soldier ratio and our speed is suboptimal, chasing small gangs of outlaws becomes exceedingly difficult, as you have seen a bit earlier when I was trying to catch some victims and they were constantly saved by larger groups. And the longer it takes me to catch a gang I can steal from, the more money I have to pay to my soldiers in the form of their daily wages. It's not uncommon for mismanaged gangs to go bankrupt in the middle of chasing their next score and eventually disband. With all this considered, I'll end the rant by saying that if any of these things were to happen to me, I'd be faced with a huge setback, and then I'll have to waste precious time walking the same steps I've already taken. Eventually it might happen. I might lose a battle or 2 or 10 in the future and get almost everything taken from me, but before that happens, I'd like to amass a good amount of wealth so that I may quickly bounce back into action. Money can always be hidden away in secret stashes that only I know about. With that lengthy explanation out of the way, let us continue our adventure. Now, where were we? Murdering fleeing looters, apparently. Now, you might have noticed that the battlefield changed in the middle of my explanation. That is because the first fight was too short to cover the entire length of the rant. So I had to add in a bit more footage from the fight after that. But now that this battle is won, let's go back to the previous one and take a look at the aftermath. At the end of my penultimate attack, 7 of my enemies died horribly while the last one survived being sliced by my sword. Now that is clearly Ironborn material, so I had to capture him and eventually invite him to join us. As for the loot, I got a rather sizable bag of gold containing 190 coins. I'm pretty sure that this is the largest payday of my entire career in Calradia, especially when you add the 129 dinars I got by selling the loot. After that fight, we spotted a few more easy targets, such as these 2 looter gangs which were about to team up and overwhelm me. But I knew how to perform evasive maneuvers, and when they split up, I chose to attack the unlucky 13. Not because they're an omen of misfortune, but because more victims equals more money and, well, you've already seen how that fight turned out. As the enemy took to their heels, I decided to kill as many as I could, and by the time the battle was over, 11 of them lost their lives and only 2 could make their escape. Which reminds me of a certain trick that allows me to squeeze more out of my victims. I call this trick the double tap, and to put it simply, whenever you defeat a group of bandits, you only take half of their money. But if you let a few of them run away and then ambush them once more, you'll also get half of what you got the first time. As you can see, the initial battle earned me 85 monies, and the double tap earned me another 43. These numbers ain't very big, but it's good enough. I should do this more often, especially to gangs that give me larger gold piles. Mere moments later, I went after the group of 9 that tried to ambush me a bit earlier, and because I made a few interesting mistakes, I'll talk about this battle. As you already know, my main tactic is to split them up and make it easier for my troops to deal with the enemy. But I also enjoy throwing javelins at people, and I tried doing that, but just as I was about to launch the missile, a rock hit me in my mouth and interrupted my attempt. Then I tried to do it again, but the result was the same. Biting rocks is a common occurrence when you fight these guys. But trust me, they're a healthier alternative compared to heavier meals such as, I don't know, javelins? Maybe 3rd time's the charm? Hell yes it is. See what I mean? This guy gave me 2 bite-sized crunchy snacks, while I gave him a meal that can last him for the rest of his life. Unfortunately, javelins have a rough texture and they can get stuck in your throat. Don't know if the Heimlich maneuver is gonna work on that. Anyway, I threw a few more harpoons at my enemies, but none of them had the common decency to die in one hit. So I needed to finish them off with a spear. They're easy to identify, what with the foot-long shaft sticking out of them like a sore thumb. When 3 of them fell into an eternal slumber, the rest wanted to stay awake for just a little while longer. But it is well past their bedtime, and as the future father figure for all bandits, I feel it is my duty to tuck them into bed and give them a good night kiss on the forehead with my sword. But doing it from horseback isn't dignified, so I rode out in front of them, dismounted, and then started to slice and dice, because doing so is apparently a great cardio exercise that improved my athletics by 3 levels. When it was all over but the crying, I got 111 gold, captured the sole survivor, and then headed over to the nearest village to sell all my loot for 272 money. I now had a total of 908 dinars, and not only that, I also had a clear goal I wanted to achieve. Obtaining 1,000. I mean, so far I obtained far more than that, but paying wages and buying horses didn't really allow me to hoard the money into a nice looking pile, so that was my final objective, in order to end this chapter on a high note. For now, my immediate concern was returning to Battania, but a gang of 17 loot takers were blocking the only way into Luther's homeland. I could probably fight them, but it was a bit risky and not worth the trouble, so I waited for them to stop loitering on the bridge. When the area was clear, we kept going, and the prisoner I took from my last battle offered to join my crew. He was the 11th member of our little band of misfits. It didn't take long after that to meet a group of 10 outlaws, declare that I'm in need of financial assistance, and then put on a javelin throwing performance for my captive audience. This would have actually been a nice transition to advertising my Patreon page if I had any, so if you want to support, just click the like button. Because these types of videos depend on the algorithm to do well, I'm going to need 5,000 of your thumb tokens before I publish episode 3. I gotta get my bread somehow, and I happen to live in a place where I can't just raid the baker or take him as my thrall. The old way's been outlawed in these parts for quite a while, and you know how I feel about being thrown into a dungeon. But enough with the demands. My looter audience was rather impressed with my show of skill, so much in fact that they turned around and started running back home, so they can tell all their friends what they've just witnessed. But I didn't want them to spread the word because I wasn't yet ready to put on another show. So I rode in front of them, dismounted, and killed them all except one, which I let go so I can double tap him and get more money. My cardio training session gained me another 3 levels in the athletic skill, and the plunder amounted to precisely 100 gold, plus another 50 from the double tap. All I had to do to reach my final objective was to head into the nearest village, a stone's throw away, and sell the loot I just got for another 100 denars. And with my goal finally achieved, I can now bring this chapter to a close. So anyway, thank you for watching, and see how easily you are deceived. You thought I was going to say, see you next time, but I don't want to end this video just yet. Not without celebrating our accomplishments, and what better way to celebrate other than murdering some folks. So I wandered the area for a bit and eventually laid my eyes on a party of 9 looters. God damn, with some tiny exceptions, in this chapter I fought nothing but looters. Sure hope that'll change in episode 3. Anyway, it's said that actions speak louder than words, so instead of describing this fight, I will take some time to honor the fallen, both on my side and on the enemies. I mean, these are just looters. Insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but at the moment, I'm not much different from them. Just a lowlife who's trying to scrape together a living in a dog-eat-dog world. So in the 18th day of summer, 3 unnamed looters and a bushwhacker have fallen victims to my cunning. 4 days later, one of the Sturgians I rescued has been killed by sea raiders, both of whom eventually joined my gang. Couple of days after that, 3 looters were slain and 2 got injured. And so it went until the 5th day of winter, by which point my party murdered a total of 83 outlaws, 62 of which fell to my blade, or my spear, or my javelins, and that's not even counting the 24 who suffered grievous injuries and were either captured or left for dead. During that period of strife, only 4 of ours were called by the drowned god. The Sturgian recruit, the sea raider who took his life, and a couple of looters. Overall, my actions have had a net positive impact on the world. If you consider the short term, I mean, a total of 107 bandits got put out of business. But long term, that isn't necessarily a good thing for this continent because their sacrifice brought strength to an even greater evil. But does evil truly exist in the absence of a moral compass? After all, we don't call the wolf evil when he tears out a deer's throat, nor the rough waves who have taken many sailors to their watery graves. These are just forces of nature, and Balon Blacktide will not do anything that isn't in his nature, such as his drive to survive and thrive the only way he knows how, by paying the iron price. And just like the Kraken on his former king's banner, he fantasizes of extending his tentacles until they envelop this whole continent, but let's be honest, that's probably never going to happen. But enough with the philosophizing. Before we conclude today's episode, let us take a brief look at what we've achieved since obtaining our first weapon. First of all, I had a couple of new additions to my arsenal, such as the Bushwhacker's Scimitar or the Raider's Spear. Secondly, I amassed a little over 1,000 gold in my personal savings account. 1,111 dinars to be precise. That magical number repeats itself in our party size, because since the 11th day of summer, I've convinced quite a few people to join the gang, and now there's 11 of us, including myself, Luther, and Vet. I wish there was a way to turn those two into companions, but I'll figure something out. And that special number showed itself one more time as I took a look at the amount of food I had left. Only 6 units, which is enough to keep my party fed for 11 days. So that's what those witches were foreshadowing in the beginning. Seems like an irrelevant detail to me. My final achievement was investing a decent amount of money into 8 Battanian horses, which was done in order to maintain and improve my party's mobility. I hope to soon have a large enough gang to be able to steal these horses, instead of paying the gold price for them. But then again, the gold I spent was earned by paying the iron price, so it's not like I'm disrespecting my traditions. But anyway, I think it's high time we brought the second chapter to an end, this time for good. So, thank you fellas for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye for now.